Coming up today, talks at the nation's top office cement the standoff between President Park Geun-hye and the main opposition party over the government's controversial decision to reintroduce state-authored history textbooks. With the second round of reunions for families separated by the Korean War set to begin in North Korea on Saturday, more than 250 South Korean participants are due to gather near the border later today. Plus, the UN's Human Rights Committee urges South Korea to do more to protect the rights of minorities. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome. It's 6 a.m. on Friday, October 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. And we start with the meeting between President Park Geun-hye and the nation's top political leaders at the presidential office. All pending issues, including the dispute over state-authored history textbooks, were on the table. Hwang Sang-hee starts us off.
The clash point at Thursday's talks was the government's push to reintroduce state-issued history textbooks.
President Park and other participants of the meeting agreed on the need for correct history education, but showed a difference of opinion regarding government authorization.
It was the first meeting in 7 months for President Park and the leaders from the two rival political parties. The government wants state history textbooks for secondary schools to eliminate left-leaning content in existing books. On the other hand, the opposition party claims this is an attempt to beautify pro-Japan activities during the colonial era and the military dictatorships decades ago.
President Park expressed disappointment that efforts for a correct history textbook have turned into political issue and stressed the need for a correct and proud history textbook for the sake of national unity.
President Park's other agenda items included ratifying Korea's free trade agreements with China, Vietnam, and New Zealand, passing key bills related to labor reform, economic revitalization, and next year's budget, as well as inter-Korean affairs. She said Korea's trade deal with China must come into effect within this year, as a day's delay is too costly for Korean exporters. Addressing the reunions for war-separated families, President Park said the event should be held on a regular basis and vowed to expand humanitarian exchanges between the two Koreas. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to that report, the ruling Seoul party positively appraised the meeting. It says the presidential office was communicating well with Parliament and the public, as you'd expect. The main opposition party saw it differently. They said the meeting merely confirmed the two sides' insurmountable differences. Park Ji-won has this report.
The ruling Seoul party evaluated Thursday's talks with the president and the opposition side quite positively. The Conservative Party's floor leader Won Yu-chul said, although the two parties couldn't agree on the most heated topic of government-led history textbooks, the talks provided an opportunity to both the presidential office and the parliament to bridge the gap in some of issues. Won said particularly issues like the necessity to ratify the currently pending Korea-China FTA deal in a bill aiming to globalize Korea's medical industry earned bipartisan understanding.
The talks held another big significance that the president had a chance to listen to the main opposition party's voice carefully. I'd like to highly evaluate that the president heard public voice through the opposition party.
However, the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy Party's leader Moon Jae-in expressed frustration after the talks. Speaking to reporters at the assembly, Moon said only insurmountable differences were confirmed. He added that the difference in perceptions on the history textbook issue is too deep to be understood.
As historical perceptions held by President Park and ruling party leader Kim Moo-sung were so distant from common sense, I felt hopeless, just like facing a colossal cliff.
Moon said the only area that his party, the president, and the ruling Seoul party all agreed upon was the need to create more jobs for the nation's youth. The NPAD's leader conveyed his regret to the public, saying his party couldn't bring out the results it anticipated from Thursday's talks. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The UN Human Rights Committee has urged the South Korean government to do more to protect the rights of minorities. At its headquarters in Geneva on Thursday local time, the committee members said South Korea still lacks protective measures for the nation's sexual minorities and foreigners married to Koreans. They also said Seoul should enact laws to better protect non-Koreans against racial discrimination. Seoul's Vice Justice Minister Kim Joo-hyun, who was at the hearing, said the South Korean government has been focusing its efforts in correcting the problem of discrimination in the country under Article 11 in the Korean Constitution, which states that all citizens are equal under the law. The United Nations says there has been no change in the dire human rights situation in North Korea over the past year. The UN's latest human rights status report, submitted to the General Assembly on Thursday, said torture and inhumane treatment was still commonplace in North Korea. It also says there is still arbitrary detention, discrimination, no freedom of expression or movement, and enforced disappearances. The report urges the international community to do more to pressure Pyongyang over its grave human rights issues. Now, Thursday was the tearful third and final day of the first round of reunions for families separated by the Korean War. For more on the day's events at North Korea's Mount Kumgang Resort, we turn to Connie Kim.
It's yet another heartbreaking goodbye. Eyes are filled with tears and hands are tightly held as families hold on to their final moments before being separated again, possibly forever. This is probably the last time Lee Jong-suk will see her father. She whispers something she's always had in her heart, but has been unable to say for so long. For everyone, it's a dream come true, but one that was far too short. It's an emotional time, a time they will remember forever. Afraid of not being able to say everything on the last day, one man had written his father a letter several pages long. In their final session, family pictures were taken for the first time in more than 60 years. Family trees were reconstructed, and some families exchanged promise rings as mementos of their time together. For these families, every minute must have felt like a second, and all too soon, an announcement tells them the time they've been wanting to avoid has finally come.
아쉽지만 10분 후에 작별 상봉을 마칠 예정입니다.
On the buses ready to depart, the families reach out for one another, trying to hold on until the last possible moment.
건강해야 돼. 통일될 때까지 계셔야 돼. 알았죠? 사랑해. 하여튼 건강하세요. 그래야 또 만날 수 있으니까 건강하셔야 돼요.
As they say their last goodbyes, there are cries of sorrow as the families don't know when or if this will be their last embrace. As the buses move away, it's too hard to bear for many, and some are unable to speak. So far, 19,000 Koreans have been reunited with one another. But given the timing, it's estimated that the majority of separated family members will have passed away within the next 25 years. So for everyone to be reunited with their loved ones, at least 6,000 people must meet every year. That's led to growing calls for the reunions to be held on a regular basis beyond the politics of the two Koreas. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the second and final round of reunions for families separated by the Korean War will take place for 3 days from this Saturday. A total of 255 South Korean participants, including 33 people in their 90s, will meet with around 180 long-lost relatives from the north. Similar to the first round, which ended as we saw on Thursday, the participants will have 6 meetings with their relatives, both in private and in open space. Each session will last for 2 hours. The members from the south will gather in Sokcho later on this Friday. They will be provided with travel guidelines before crossing the border to the Mount Gumgang resort the following day. South Korea is the world's 5th largest nuclear energy powerhouse, and it's becoming increasingly dependent on atomic energy. But that has naturally raised safety concerns, with growing calls for greater cooperation across Northeast Asia. Geunhye has this report.
How do Koreans feel about nuclear energy and the safety of the country's reactors?
Nothing has happened so far. I feel safe.
I'm not that interested in the issue. I believe the country deals with it safely.
I feel a bit uneasy. I've read about the frequent malfunctions at nuclear reactors in a lot of articles.
I'm worried because of the accident in Japan. Korea has enough nuclear reactors, and I don't think we need more.
The public is divided, but what can't be denied is that Korea is the 5th largest nuclear energy powerhouse in the world, and the country has more nuclear power plants in the works. The same goes for China.
The International Atomic Energy Agency predicts that the number of nuclear reactors in the world will have expanded by 60% by 2040 compared to 2013.
While Japan shut down all but one of its reactors after the Fukushima disaster, and many Western countries are shuttering plants as well, the demand for nuclear energy in Northeast Asia is growing, largely for economic and environmental reasons. That was the point emphasized at the International Forum on Northeast Asia Nuclear Safety Cooperation on Thursday, but also
more and more we need to push for better strengthening our international cooperation.
Accidents can happen, but the correct prevention and response to nuclear accidents is so critical that experts say simply sharing information on safety regulations is not enough. There has to be intervention too.
A good example of this kind of intervention is how European countries began monitoring each other's nuclear plants after the Fukushima disaster.
Considering the geographical proximity of Korea, China and Japan, I think we should raise safety levels to a place where each country is confident about the others.
And that's what experts from the 3 countries are aiming for, saying there are no borders when it comes to nuclear safety. Geunhye, Arirang News.
Now, we all expect to be greeted with a smile when we enter a store, or a cheerful voice when we phone a call centre. But have you ever wondered about the emotional stress this can place on workers who have to work long hours, or often under very stressful circumstances? Well, a recent survey shows this is a real issue in Korea, and there are growing calls on businesses to do more to protect their employees. Oh Soo-young reports.
Service with a smile is a daily task for Chung Ise, a nail artist working in Seoul. Regardless of how she feels that day, chatting with her clients with a cheerful expression is part of her job description.
I make an effort to keep talking to my customers and keep them happy, but it can be difficult when I'm tired.
A recent survey showed that nail art is one of the most emotionally draining jobs in Korea. It involves intensive emotional labour, which requires staff to regulate their emotions as part of their profession. Most service-related workers engage in the highest levels of emotional labour. Among them are hotel managers, airline agents and career consultants. And at the top of the list are telemarketing staff, who go through countless calls throughout the day, more often than not dealing with anger, profanities and offensive remarks from customers.
Stress took over my life. I had to deal with swearing, sexual remarks, and even insults about my parents. Even after work, I kept worrying about what kind of clients I'd handle the next day.
Despite such grueling conditions, most service companies fail to protect or compensate their workers.
Companies in the service industry compete in customer care, so the customer-first policy puts workers in an inferior position, vulnerable to emotional abuse.
This raises concerns as the service industry has been growing over the last few years. To address this situation, lawmakers have tabled a bill to protect the rights of workers under emotional labour. The Labour Ministry is also working on various protection measures.
To prevent high emotional stress, the ministry's running consumer campaigns as well as counseling and consulting sessions.
Experts say emotional labour must be legally recognised as an occupational hazard to ensure companies improve their working conditions and provide employee benefits such as counselling. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Friday morning here in Seoul. Thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Goodbye.